Blessings, everyone. Thank you for joining me, and it's my great pleasure to have Father Paul here today again. It's been a couple of years since I've talked to him last. Could you introduce yourself again, Father?
Sure. My name is Father Paul Jannakos, and I'm the parish priest at St. Luke Orthodox Church here in Palos Hills, Illinois, which is one of the southwest suburbs of Chicago. I've been a parish priest for almost 40 years, I think
Wow.
39 and a half years. And then I just finished my kind of tour of duty as the chancellor of our diocese here in Chicago.
Wow.
I was also the chancellor for a number of years here, and I'm also a part-time licensed professional counselor,
That's right.
psychotherapist for ethos counseling services here in the Chicago area as well. So I do some counseling, not as much as I did, when I was younger. When we get older, we accept our limitations, don't we? Yeah,
I remember talking about that last time we were
yeah,
together, and even though I haven't spoken to Father for a while,
yeah.
we still follow each other on Facebook, so I kind of feel like I'm still up to date with what
Yes.
Father's doing. Now, I wanted to share.
Oh, right. Yes.
So Father, um, not too long ago, posted this kind of innocuous, what I thought, picture, and you put a blurb at the bottom, um, about the Orthodox priesthood, and I reposted it on Facebook, and a lot of Roman Catholics just went flipped. So,
Uh-huh. Okay.
which I,
They kind of went berserk, huh? Yeah.
yeah, which I thought was interesting. So,
Right.
yeah.
Right.
And then
Right.
Father, I kind of double down on things typically. So, but I
Sure.
kind of thought this was an interesting way to evangelize with pictures,
Yeah.
because sometimes when you like I like to post like quotes from the saints or something. So sometimes people will say, "Well, you misinterpreted a quote or something." But I mean, a picture is
Mhm.
different. So I kind of doubled down, and I
There
put
you are.
I put
Yeah.
the married priesthood or the gay priesthood. So
I saw that. Yeah. Of course. Yeah.
sorry,
There you
Father.
are. Well, and pretty
This,
much that's
this,
uh,
this is
that's what's going on here in America quite a bit, isn't it?
that's
Yeah.
Catholicism or Orthodoxy, and then this one was a
Yeah.
Catholicism versus Orthodoxy. But I kind of thought, is like you said, like I said, it's like an interesting way to evangelize, because I'm not really commenting. I'm just posting two
Mhm.
pictures side by
Yeah.
side, and
Right.
people can come up with their own.
Right.
So I wanted to talk about with you, since that picture brought up so much,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
sort of vitriol
Or
about
or
about
let's call it discussion.
about clerical celibacy, because I think that's confuses people
Yes.
in the West, especially among Catholics. And I have
Sure.
to say, Father, the one thing that was probably the most difficult thing to get used to in Orthodoxy wasn't like the liturgy or anything, but it was
Hmm.
the married priesthood. It was so foreign, because it was like, well, Father, has a wife. Father is a
Right.
father. Father has children. You know,
Uh,
father's a
yeah.
man. So it was difficult to get used to,
Right. Yeah.
and I'm still kind of
Well, it is kind of a foreign reality in the West.
yeah.
We should just kind of remember a little bit of history, and not just church history, but history, which is that the Orthodox Church from the very beginning has always had married apostles, and from them married clergy. A married presbyterate would be a more theologically accurate way to describe that. We know from the epistles of St. Paul that bishops were married in the early church, the apostolic church of the first century, but that was when, that was before, those two offices of either bishop or presbyter had become kind of distinct in the way that they are now. And there were married bishops even in the Orthodox Church up until the beginning of the 4th century. And there was a reason that the church chose to have not so much celibate bishops, but monastic bishops would be a more proper way to say this. However, from day one, the Orthodox Church has had a married priesthood. And I said in that little quote that this is one of the greatest treasures of our church. Historically as well, in the West, we should be reminded that even in the Roman Church, there was a married priesthood up until the 10th century, beginning of the 11th century. And even especially in Britain, among the Anglo-Saxon, in what they call the Anglo-Saxon church, that was standard to have a married priesthood. And it was only when the Normans came in, of course, with the Battle of Hastings in the 11th century, that the Normans, the strict Roman Catholics began to kind of forcefully eliminate a married priesthood, even in England. But in England and Ireland and in Britain, the married priesthood probably survived at least another century than it did on the continent.
Yeah.
So, and there are reasons for that, and I'm not sure that we want to devote some time to that, at least in this session.
Yeah. Father, I'm curious why, because I that was one of the other things I noticed in becoming Orthodox is that today the bishops are celibate monastics. Well, no,
right.
why was that decision made that the parish priests could be married and then the bishops are all celibate monastics? Why?
So, what happened, and it was a gradual process, but what happens is that the bishops become servants of the state. They take on the same responsibilities and the same honor even as a state magistrate. And because the bishops were holding basically so much property, this is what you find in both the East and the West, that there was this problem, of passing on, the bishopric, to your children. And it still exists, in a number of different ways. It changed even after celibacy to nephews, so that's where we, of course, get this idea. But and then also with the rise of monasticism as being a force, in the life of the church naturally felt that your best leadership in this very important place of in the life of the church is going to be fulfilled by monastic bishops. And I still believe that that's true, and there's some practical reasons for that as well, in terms of the bishops having to do their kind of traveling. The kind of traveling that they do is actually apostolic, of course, and it's very difficult for a bishop to be there with his family and his home, in the way that a father could and should be, in this kind of way. So there's some real practical differences there as well.
Yeah.
But the Orthodox Church never lost its married priesthood, and still today, the tradition is for married priests to be in parishes and for monastic clergy to be in monasteries.
Exactly.
And there are healthy reasons for that. And there are exceptions to that, of course.
Yeah.
There are good monastic clergy who have been assigned as parish priests. There's no doubt that that's the case. And in rare cases, I've seen where a married priest, usually a widow,
Mm,
is assigned as a confessor, for example, to a women's monastery.
mm,
That has happened in Greece before, and I'm sure it's happened, and I'm sure that it's happened elsewhere.
mm.
But that's more or less the precedent.
Yeah. But preparing to speak with you on this subject, I did quite a bit of research, and
Mm,
I was kind of surprised how little I knew as a
mm,
as a longtime Catholic, because I always thought that like priestly celibacy was just the way it was from the time of
mhm.
Christ. So I did some research. So in the West, in the Roman Catholic Church, it wasn't until 1139, which
Correct?
was the Second Lateran Council, where mandatory celibacy was required. So
Correct.
that's over 1,000 years after
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah.
And then I think you kind of mentioned that with where you were talking about in England, the mandatory celibacy rule didn't really go over that well in the
Yeah.
West. There
Yeah.
was resistance from both
Yes.
the priesthood and the laity,
Hmm.
and it seems like there were, whether or not there were problems before, I'm sure there were, but it
Mm,
seems like after that, uh, there were already issues with homosexuality in the priesthood in the West.
mm,
So in 1179, you had the Third Lateran Council,
mm,
and there was a man, well, he was a cleric, Peter Cantor. He actually
mhm,
formally tried to enforce anti-sodomy initiatives among the clergy. So, I mean, we're right
yeah.
after. And then in
Yeah.
1215, the Fourth Lateran Council, one of Peter's students, oh, what was his name? I can't think of his name right now, but he
Mm,
he pushed for a repeal of mandatory celibacy
mm,
among the priesthood. So
mm.
it didn't go that well. And then of course you had Peter Damian, who was
Sure.
who wrote several I guess books you'd call it about the problem. So it didn't it's not like I think in Roman, and sometimes in our Roman Catholic mind, we always just think that that's the way it was. The priests have always been celibate, and that
Yeah. Yeah.
the Eastern sort of are doing their own thing.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and even actually we could say that, with the creation, of the so-called Byzantine Rite Catholic Church,
Hmm.
which previous Orthodox churches in what is now Western Ukraine and in southern Poland and in Slovakia, they were politically subjugated under the Pope. The bishops they of course apostatized, but they kept their married priesthood, and they still do to this day. And even one of the great founders of the particular jurisdiction that I serve in, the Orthodox Church in America,
Hmm.
uh, we basically was from a former Ruthenian, Byzantine Rite priest who came to America. And then the first thing that he was able to do, knowing his history, was to be reconciled to the Orthodox Church. But he was required when he came to the United States to come to the serve his papers to the Roman Catholic bishop. He was required to do that, and the Roman Catholic bishop, who was in St. Paul, Minnesota, and you know him, of course, as John. I think John Henry Newman,
Hmm.
um, at that time said he was angry, and he told him, even though Saint Alexis Toth was a widower, he came as a widower. His wife had died in the former Slovakia, and he said, "We do not want your kind here,
Oh boy.
in the American Roman Catholic Church." And that's when he, literally got on a train and went to San Francisco there and reconciled to the Orthodox Church with who was, Saint Tikhon of Moscow, who was there at the same time. So there's a fascinating history. And then all of, 120 years ago, you have this cascade of former Byzantine Rite priests, along with their parishes, that are now coming back to Orthodoxy
Good.
because they had the opportunity to. They didn't have that opportunity, in the old country. So, and we're still receiving. Just 2 years ago, we received a wonderful Byzantine Rite Catholic priest with 7 children
Wow.
in the Parma area, and he was received back into the Orthodox Church, and is now a wonderful young Orthodox priest in the Cleveland area. So it's still happening. Yeah.
Wonderful. The thing that kind of surprised me too about the issue of clerical celibacy, because I kind of thought that it's kind of surface, these priests are married and these priests aren't, but it doesn't go
Right.
much deeper than that. But
Yeah.
I was, I did some reading, especially for the John Strickland book. I kind of wanted to get to that with you real quick.
Mm-hmm.
Is it has more profound theological and dogmatic, I think, ramification. This is one book that I recommend to my readers a lot. It's called The Corrupter of Boys, and it's by a professor at Northwestern
Mm-hmm.
University. I recently wrote to her. I wanted to interview her, but she doesn't like to do podcasts, which I
Yeah.
understand. But
Yeah.
she wrote, "The
Mm-hmm.
struggle for clerical celibacy is a dark story marked by unintended effects and tragic consequences. By insisting on absolute chastity, Western religious authorities were, in essence, constructing a capacious closet that accommodated all manner of sexual behavior." I just thought it was interesting she used that that phrase, closet, because I think it did. And then she wrote, "The routing of married clergy was immediately followed by a flourishing of homoerotic liturgy in clerical circles." So it was interesting because in this book, she traced how the removal of married priests kind of violently, you know, from
Yeah.
the church
Yeah.
set up these clerical closets where,
Right.
homosexual priests, for lack of a better word,
Yeah.
we're sort of free to express themselves, maybe
Yeah.
in a manner that wouldn't have been possible if there
Yeah.
had been married heterosexual priests.
And Joseph, let me add to that,
Go ahead,
because
Father.
I would agree there. I would say, however, that we're always looking for, multiple symptoms. That's where my kind of
Mm,
my research background comes in, and so that's one of the historical reasons. Absolutely. Another reason is because the church has canons, and the canon laws of our church are there the great majority of them for the protection of the people against bad clergy. When you ignore those canon laws, right? I mean, there are some pretty basic ones that are there for a reason. When you sweep those away, then you have opened those communities up to the potential of abuse, because, as you've just alluded to, you thereby make a way for these kind of behaviors to be somehow normalized, even if it's kind of at one point in the life of the church, history of the church, kind of underground. You see
Yeah.
what I'm saying? But well, what's the difference between that and the Orthodox Church? Well, we do have this in our church, and we do struggle with it, even among, in monastic life, but we take it up as something that needs to be healed, and we practice canon law, so that if there is a priest who harms or abuses somebody in his community, be that community a parish or a monastery, then the canon laws come into play, and that priest is removed, not even so much as punishment, but he's removed first in order to help the community, and second to save him. So because they're not punitive.
Father, the first instinct isn't to prevent scandal, is it?
No, I mean that's always a consideration in a practical way. But
It's not the first consideration. Yeah. I think that's what you're saying. Yeah.
Let's call it a motivation. The motivation of these kind of canonical precedents is to keep our people as safe as possible, and to close the window. Now, we have that problem once in a while. We have to, someone will be brought to court and defrocked. And it has always been that way, and it will always be. There are sheep in, there are wolves in sheep clothing.
Exactly.
And you know that, right?
Yeah,
and
a little bit. Yeah.
But we don't normalize it. And that makes a huge difference, doesn't it?
Don't you think too, Father, there's a balance I mean, because in the West, you have a celibate hierarchy and a celibate priesthood.
Yeah.
So in Orthodoxy, you have not that one is better than the other, but in Orthodoxy, you have a celibate hierarchy, but you have a married priesthood.
Correct. Yes.
So that's kind
Yes.
of I mean, that's kind of a different
It's the
dynamic.
best. I think it's the best of both worlds,
I
because we
agree.
remember that, monasticism is, a tradition of the church, that has been in place for centuries. And we remember too, historically, that monasticism is a form of witness. It's a form of martyrdom. So in the early church, you had what we call red martyrdom, blood martyrdom. And then after the age of martyrdom, so-called, ended, again at the beginning of the 4th century with, the end of the persecutions of Diocletian, which were particularly severe. You have the emergence of monasticism. And that is what we call white martyrdom, a martyrdom of the spirit. And so some people in the church are called to lead this monastic life. And even though we don't have time to get into it, there is certainly a witness that is very, very crucial, within the life of the church. And in America today, I think our orthodoxy does suffer because we don't have the strong monasticism, the monastic presence yet. We're coming along little by little, but in most Orthodox churches where you have a healthy monasticism, you do have a healthy episcopacy, and you have a healthy orthodoxy. And I've traveled a bit, and I have to say that what I'm most impressed by is the monastic presence and life in Romania. Romanian Orthodox monasticism is, in my view, the strongest and the healthiest monasticism in the Orthodox world right now.
Wow.
So, I mean, there are women monasteries. There are 2 sister monasteries, for example, Varatek and Agata monasteries. The sister monasteries, they're 5 miles apart in the beautiful Carpathian Mountains. And together, those 2 monasteries have 1,000 nuns, almost. Yes,
Wow.
and so it, other than Mount Athos, of course, it's all there. But then in Romania, all of the village churches, the parish churches, are mostly served by Romanian Orthodox priests who are married with beautiful families, and the
That's
same is
nice.
true in Greece and Russia and Ukraine and of course Serbia, in the Middle East with
That's
of
nice.
course that's the standard, that's the practice.
I'm blessed where I live because not far from here is Holy Dormition Monastery in Calistoga,
Yeah,
and there,
beautiful.
yeah, and they have a
Uh,
there's a wonderful spirit that they have. So it
yeah,
it it is. You're right, Father. It is good. One other quote just from this one book, real quick.
yeah.
Is it
Hmm.
this was that particular cleric. He was a cardinal, Robert of Corson, I was talking about.
Hmm.
He considered uh, the problem, of homosexuality so pernicious and ubiquitous that he was in favor at Lateran IV of abolishing
Hmm.
clerical celibacy altogether. So it has been a contentious issue in
Hmm.
the West. This is an interesting book, real quick, too.
Hmm.
This is by John Boswell. I mean, a lot of Catholics dismiss him. He was
Hmm.
Catholic himself, but he was a homosexual. But I mean, I can kind of read his work a little more
Hmm.
subjectively. But he wrote something interesting here. He wrote, contemporaries at least were quick to note that homosexual priests would be more willing than heterosexual ones to enforce prohibitions against clerical marriage. I thought that was kind of
Absolutely.
interesting.
But the blessings of the marriage of a married priesthood in the life are of the church, they have to be emphasized. For example, people will ask me all the time, what does that mean for you to be with a family and then to be, the father of a parish? And I have to say, well, it means everything, because I would hope that I have a sense of what people are living and what their problems are, what their challenges are, what their
Exactly.
sufferings are in terms of family life, and like parents will talk about raising teenagers, and okay, I've raised 4 children, they're all adults now, and I had a wonderful time with my children, when they were all teenagers. For the most part, we had our bumps in the road, but and they'll come and say, what do I do with my 14-year-old girl?
Exactly.
She's become this kind of sassy kind of creature, and I smile and I say, you too, I know exactly, you just have to be patient, you have to love them, and kind of work with it. But when people in a parish know that their priest kind of has lived that
Mm,
existentially, there is a sense of
I
the
agree.
incarnation, the mystery of the incarnation that will really help to kind of sanctify all of that, which is the goal, that we sanctify the totality of our lives.
Mm.
And even well, my spiritual father when I was a young seminarian was Father Tom Hopko, who is
Wow,
very,
Father,
yeah,
he's had a big influence over me.
yeah, he's a wonderful man, and he
Oh,
was a very holy man. But I think that he was very practical, and he was very, very much educated and very much into the monastic Orthodox spirit. He really understood the monastic witness in the church, and I knew that because I was his student for 7 years, and you just listen. He really, really understood it. But then he would say stuff like this. He would say, "You can take a young, you can take a young Greek archimandrite, who is of course, a monastic priest.
mm,
Maybe he's 28 years old, and he would say, he would not last 1 hour
Mm,
with a sick baby, you know,
mm,
because what he's saying is that there are two different callings.
I agree.
Parents keep all night vigil by taking care of their sick children. And that's across the carry. Monastics do all night vigil and pray for the whole world. But he's absolutely right that there are crosses to carry, and that they're very different. So having married priest is really part of the incarnational mystery in the life of the church. I would say it's at the very heart of things. I've heard people say that Christ was celibate. Well, yes and no. He was, of course, celibate in the strict sense, and of course our icon of perfect chastity and purity. But he was married. He was married to the church.
Mm,
His wife was his body, and
wow.
we cannot deny that. So much so that even St. Paul, writes about the marriage between Christ and the church in this famous passage to the Ephesians as being the model for all Christian marriages. And then of course in the book of Revelation, there is the bridegroom who is reconciled, with his bride. And then the very substance of the kingdom of heaven becomes the ongoing eternal wedding banquet that the Father serves for his Son.
Mm,
It's a beautiful thing. It's absolutely nuptial.
wow.
And then we have to go back to what's an interesting book of the Old Testament, which is the Song of Songs, which is a erotic wedding poem, that actually even in Israel today, if you're an Orthodox Jew, you're not allowed to read that until you're 18 or 21, because it
Really?
is
Wow.
very poetic, but
Wow.
but of course very erotic. But it's interesting that the fathers received that, the monastics received that poem and accepted it both in the literal sense, that the nuptial love between a husband and wife is created and blessed and sanctified by God. And then they also allegorized it to death. you know so but
Go ahead, Father. I lost Father for a couple of minutes and then now he's back.
all right, yeah, my internet crashed, so um the uh the computer demons didn't like what we were saying.
Exactly.
Well, anyway, so the Orthodox Church, in the way that it expresses its spirituality, especially through the Holy Fathers, they like to say that it's nuptial. And when it comes to the way that we show our love for God, it is of course through charity. But remember too that the way that we respond to God's love, being human beings, is through desire. And the word that the fathers used even for desire was the word eros. The Holy Fathers were using this word. Of course, they elevated it, and they christened it literally to mean the desire of the soul for God. Human love sanctified by the Holy Spirit of God, that achieves communion with God,
Yeah.
so that it's not something platonic.
No.
It's never been understood in a platonic way. Matter of fact, the more platonic it was in the past, the more heretical it usually was at the same time.
Exactly.
But this is, of course, coming from our Old Testament background, and so we have to be very clear about what we mean when we speak about
Yeah.
marriage, and what we mean when we speak about celibacy. So I would even go so far as to say that in our church we don't really have celibate priests. There are a few that float around who are celibate and not monastic. But if you're a celibate priest, you're usually, or should be, at least in my view, a monastic
Mm.
priest. And again, you're not living alone.
Exactly.
You're living in a community, and being in a community, being in a
Exactly.
family is what creates both health and then
Exactly.
also keeps everybody safe.
Exactly,
Right?
Father. This is the
Yeah.
problem the Catholic Church has had. Real quick, because I
Yeah.
know you got to go.
Yeah.
This is
Yes.
a series of books that I really like by Father
Hmm.
John
Oh,
Strick.
yes. Father Strickland is very good. Yes.
He's I love him. So
Yeah.
the books are great.
Yeah.
Can I read you just a couple of things real quick, and then maybe in a few
Please.
minutes you could kind of explain it.
Yeah.
Um,
Sure.
uh,
Sure.
because I think they're important. It says the demand for clerical celibacy represented an effort to monasticize the parish clergy, which formerly had been distinct from monastics. This had much to do with the reformers' Augustinian anthropology. As early as the 10th century, Abbot Otto of Cluny had claimed that all sexual activity is intrinsically evil, and that the child that results from relations, even among married parents, is
Right.
stained with
Yes.
original sin and deserving of damnation. And then Father
Hmm.
Strickland continues right here. He wrote, excuse me, Father, the celibate parish priest was now raised above the married layman. He was now
Hmm.
required to live by the extraordinary standard of a monk, despite the
Hmm.
experience of a millennium in which two paths of ministry, cloistered and public, had been kept distinct. I know that's two big things there, Father, but I think they're
Sure.
important. It kind of like speaks to what I was saying before, that celibacy runs much deeper than just a married priest and a celibate priest, but it's like dogmatic in terms of Catholicism and their views of original sin and sexuality.
Yes,
And
of
then
course.
fathers, yeah, talking about here what you were just saying is that a celibate
Yeah.
priest placed in a parish is required to live by a monk, like a monk, but without the benefits of a community.
And that's where the hurt and all of the danger comes in.
That's
I
it.
mean, it's impossibility. It's impossible to do that. You know, and that's why we have this kind of, well, let's call it what it is. It's neurotic. And what do we mean by neurotic? We mean that we pretend something works when it really doesn't,
Right.
right? That's, well, okay. I'm a psychotherapist too. We're pretending that this is all working just fine when in fact it's a catastrophe of the highest sort. So, but that's also why the church in her,
Why is that? Why is that, Father? People don't get that.
well, I think they like to pretend. We all like to pretend. And let's just maybe we can close with these few thoughts about what Father John Strickland just said, which is that the original sin is not something that is passed on through the nuptial act, sexual act itself.
Hmm.
That was kind of, there, I don't think any Roman Catholic theologian today would actually formulate that, but it was certainly somehow there in the medieval Roman Catholic Church. That's why they had this disdain for that. And as a matter of fact, I think one of the practical reasons or psychological reasons that you had celibacy enforced in the West was because they had a distaste of human sexuality, and that they could not wrap their heads around the fact that, and I will say it, that the priest is at the altar, elevating the holy gifts. You're right, holy things for the holy. And then the priest is also called at the very same time, a married priest, to love his wife.
Hmm.
That's the part that was neurotic in the West. And in the East, I have to say, there was never a problem deep down, because there's this understanding of well, the nuptial relationship that Christ has with his church, which is his bride, and that human sexuality is to be sanctified, like everything else that we have, in our lives. Married people take upon themselves that cross, and it is a cross of the
Mm.
highest sort. You know, it's a blessing, but
Yeah.
it has to be sanctified, and there's going to be struggles and failures inevitably for everybody. But we do not see it somehow as being an expression of the fall. Even though some of the fathers would say in almost a Platonic way that, the garments of flesh, you know, were symbolic of some of this stuff. But that was only their theologumena. That was just those were some ideas, but the church has never said this is what original sin is, and here's how it's passed on, through procreation. The church does not believe in this. It believes in primordial sin, and that the primordial sin is passed on through what it says in the scriptures, through the presence of mortality. It's because we die that we sin, and primordially in the beginning, that was the relationship, and that's what Father John Strickland, I believe, was just quoting, in this kind of way. But getting back to my point about human sexuality needing to be saved and healed and sanctified, this is part of what we do in the life of the church, just like we do with everything, just like we do with everything else in life.
Yeah.
And that's a wonderful thing. Yeah, it's a wonderful thing.
Before you go, Father, I know you got to go. You touched upon something that I thought was really important a little while ago, and when you mentioned Father Hopko, it
Right.
reminded me of
Wonderful book.
reminded me of his good book. And the difference between Father as a married priest, I mean, I think the kind of fraternal sort of, or
Right.
I'm sorry, paternal sort of aspect, I think it comes out in this book.
Yeah.
And because I've read a lot of books by Catholic priests
Yeah.
on the same subject, and they just come off a little differently. Not that they're
Right.
bad, or it's just different. And I
Right.
got to
Yeah.
say that with Orthodox priests, it's different as well. I mean, from Catholic priests, I have to say I usually got really good sort of spiritual advice, maybe about prayer
Mm-hmm.
or the
Mm-hmm.
spiritual life. I have to
Mm-hmm.
say, when it came to day-to-day living,
Stuff.
yeah, not so good.
Right. Well, and that's what we're looking to do, is to we learn how to pray everything, and to offer it back to God through our prayer, and then God gives it back to us so that we can have the right relationship with it. What is not offered becomes an idol,
Yeah.
and idols destroy. So, and I know that in my own life, and I think anybody who's a legitimate Christian, led by the Holy Spirit, knows that we have these idols, and that we let them go, we give them up, and we let God, God heal us, and then, we're. But anyway, thank you, Joseph. God
Thank you,
bless you
Father.
for all your good work.
Oh, thank you,
I'm
Father.
very grateful for all that you do, and of course, and may God continue really to bless it for good.
Thank you. Thank you,
Yes.
Father. And I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me about
All
this.
right.
So thank you,
All
Father.
right. We'll do this again, I hope.
Please.